Hey guys, so I thought I'd try something new where I go through not just the best 5 decks in the current format, but also just breaking down the deck cost just to see if we can assess some of the best value for money decks. And so basically what I did was just for every single card in that deck list, I literally searched them up on TCG Player, went with the lowest listed market price and just kind of priced things out. I know there are websites out there that you can, put your deck list in and it gives you the total price on TCG Player, but I was finding that it wasn't very accurate, so I just decided to do it myself. And before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as always, links and discount codes in the description below, and you can also join the Dragonrider Facebook group to play some online Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments. So the 5th best deck I had was Swordsoul, and if you saw my monthly tier list by the data videos, you would see that Swordsoul was also ranked 5th in terms of the scoring. It was the 5th most played deck online among all decks in the last 7 days. The 49% match win percentage is not too high compared to where it usually is, but you know what, maybe that'll improve over time. I think since its release and since its original tier 1 days over a year ago, it's always been known as a very consistent strategy. It has that Barone for that Omni negate, has that Swordmaster for the monster negate, and the Blackout for the double pop, gets to that very reliably, and is now back into kind of meta contention again. And it's a really solid deck, especially for players who maybe have always been playing Rogue or like tier 7 decks. If they're looking into playing kind of like a meta tier 1, tier 1.5 deck for the first time, I think Swordsoul is a great one to start with. It's certainly not the most complicated deck to play, and also budget wise it's pretty solid, as you will see here. So this is a topping list from YCS Vegas Joe, who finished top 4. And so extra deck, or rather main deck, was about $260, and keep in mind 150 of that is actually from the double triple tactic thrust, which you totally do not have to play, and you can just not play that and just shed most of the cost. So even overall total was about $380 USD, and again I listed each of these cards separately. And so for example, another card like Talents, you could technically take that out as well in terms of cost. And then in the extra deck, I think the Barone, it is getting reprinted very shortly with Maze of Memories coming out, and that's the price I use in terms of pre-sale prices. So it's certainly a lot cheaper than what it was, about half of the price of what it was, but it's still pretty expensive, around $50. But overall, I think this is such a good value for money deck in terms of, it gets the regional tops, it gets YCS tops. It's pretty, I don't want to say too straightforward, but it's not the most really hard deck to play or anything. So I think it's certainly a deck I would recommend to someone who's maybe returning to competitive play and just want to play something pretty solid, but doesn't have to jump straight into some really expensive deck or anything. So I think this is a very good option. And then we have Spright as the 4th best deck, at least from scoring perspective, and also it was the 3rd most played deck online. Still seeing a lot of play, whether it's Pure Spright, Tri-Brigade Spright, Runic Spright, and the like, and I guess Gishki. But I mean, some of those versions, of course, technically all of those versions, do suffer quite a bit with the ban of Spright Elf, but it's definitely still playable. 53% match win percentage, certainly far from the days of, its tier 1 level where it was getting like 60% consistently, but it's still very solid. What I love about this deck is that it's very not only consistent, but it has a lot of flex spots for utility cards, so you can play a lot of hand traps, a lot of board breakers. So that means you can the deck is good going first or second when you lose a die roll, and on top of that, it also makes siding patterns very easy because you have a lot of flex spots and you never really have to take out the engine cards out. So I really like this deck. Does not really have a terrible matchup against the key decks right now, at least. So certainly love it. And so this is Din's first place list from a regional not too long ago, and he actually has a YouTube channel, so definitely go make sure to check that out. His channel name is the same as his name, and so I'll link that down below. Has this really useful in-depth Sprite profile that you see here. Basically, you'll notice he wasn't playing Toad, he was actually going for the lock with Goliath or the Ryo through Mannequin Cat. And so the deck, personally, I was actually very surprised when I costed it out. It ended up being $500. 150 of that does come from Prosperity. You could cut that out in terms of just playing and relying on that period. Some people just do that anyways, and so that's certainly one way to shed the cost. The blues are kind of expensive. A play set's like a little over $100, and then some of the other cards sort of slowly add up. For example, the starters are like $10 each. You have double Zeus because of Kashtira, making you play multiples of the same copies of certain cards in the extra deck, so that's like $25 each. And the side deck, of course, you can easily change this. The Talents is probably the most expensive one on here in the side. And so overall, this is another deck that if you already had the staples and the hand traps, then it's certainly a deck I would recommend. Again, it's just it's a pretty for the most part straight straightforward to play, at least compared to some of the other decks that we've had, like such as Tearlands, for example, which was a very galactic brain deck. But Spright is pretty solid and pretty easy to play, and it's just, you know, a very versatile deck, and certainly a deck that I would recommend. And then we have Labrynth, which, you know, it's interesting. At the time that I did the meta tier list video, it actually was not able to be identified by YGO scope. But now I did reach out to Sunny a little over a week ago about that. Fortunately, now the site can identify it. It was the 6th most played deck in the last 7 days. I suspect it's actually higher, and probably, you know, 1 or 2 of those 7 days, maybe Labrynth still could not be identified, so the counts are being underrepresented. But 55% match win percentage overall, pretty solid. I mean, it's a back row deck overall, essentially, so it can just get blown out sometimes in certain matches with just people drawing evenly match or whatever other back row hate. But at the same time, Labrynth is kind of special too, because you know, aside from the Heavenly Prison protecting back row, it does have easy access to very strong cards like D-Barrier or Eradicator Virus, which, you know, even if they're destroyed, doesn't really matter. You just play it and the opponent probably can't play for the turn, and you just have a lot of grind game, and the deck is very, very solid. Of course, has been doing very well at events, including with the YCS, and so Ryan did finish 2nd place at the Team YCS Vegas, and so, you know, it's a very solid deck. I mean, in terms of cost though, it's certainly not a cheap deck though, unfortunately. Like, a lot of the traps are cheap, but the problem is, you know, something like Welcome Labrynth, that's a hefty card now, like $40 a piece. You also have the Lady Labrynth, which I think are like 15 each, and then again, the Prosperities just adds up another $150. The extra deck, you know, Ryan's extra deck in particular was $100, but realistically, if you need to cut costs, you can really replace them with any cards. I mean, you just kind of need like the Dogmatic Punishment targets, but the extra deck, this is not a deck where you actually need the extra deck, so, you know, you can certainly be more flexible with that. The side deck as well, that can always be different for whatever deck you're playing. The sphere modes are kind of expensive right now, so that's something that you can shed costs on as well. Overall, you know, very strong trap strategy. I'm certainly not a fan of, you know, the kind of format we're in, where we're either trying to lock zones with Kashtira or trying to, you know, stop the opponent from special summoning with Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, or now just turboing out like D-Barrier or Eradicator. So not the best format. I think even without those powerful trap cards, like let's say D-Barrier, which probably would get banned at some point, I think this Labrynth deck is still very, very solid. One of the more unique and very strong trap decks that we've had in this game's history. And so if you love trap decks, this is certainly the best one that's out there, and certainly I would recommend, except just be mindful that the deck is not cheap to play. And then the second best deck, we have Branded. Of course, you know, when that ban list dropped, people expected Branded to be one of the better decks out there, and match win percentage wise, 54%. It's pretty solid. Now, the one thing with YGO scope, that is, it's basically including any deck that's playing Branded Fusion, and while most of it's Branded Despia, not all of them are. So if you were to focus specifically on Branded Despia, I suspect its win percentage is actually higher, and the deck is just, you know, when it's good, it's good. It does have the tendency to brick though, but you know what, it's a very interactive deck. It's a very high skill ceiling deck. Certainly fun to play, one of the best fusion strategies to ever come out, I would say, and just, yeah, really, really cool lore as well as a bonus. In terms of deck list, this is John Wilkins' 2nd place list. He was on the same team as Ryan Yu, and so, you know, I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that the deck was not as expensive as I thought it would be once you actually cost things out, every single one of them. And so one of the key reasons for that is he was only playing 1 Lubellion, and that's something like $95, $100. You know, a lot of people up until this point were playing 2 to 3, which really adds up the cost. So, you know, now you can get it with just 1 and makes your wallet a little bit easier. And then now Blazing Cartesia is a little bit more expensive. It's about 45 USD, and he was playing 2. Most people were playing just 1 copy at this point. You can still just play 1 to shed cost, and you can get away with that. You definitely need at least 1 though, and that's kind of where the bulk of the main deck is coming from. And then you also have, you know, in the extra, you have Dragoon playing double because of Kashtira, of course. A lot of the extra deck cards in here are just from the structure deck, which is very cheap. You have some of the newer ones like Granganol and the Rinbrum from Photon, not expensive. And the Guardian Chimera also is getting reprinted in Maze of Memories and the prices, at least the pre-sale price that I used for this video, it's about half of what it was before the reprint. And then on the side, really the only one that stands out price-wise is that Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, which is used to lock your opponent from being able to special summon for that turn. And so that's it's definitely spiked since John and the crew, did well at the YCS. I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, I personally have an unfortunate story with this card, with the vendor canceling an order on me and relisting at a much higher price. But funnily enough, I guess John saw that tweet and he tagged me on Facebook to buy this card off someone else. So thanks, John. I did manage to get it. So overall, solid deck. Again, high skill ceiling, and it's not too expensive, at least for a meta deck from historical perspective, and so something to consider. And finally, we have Kashtira, which of course is the best deck of the format, and had the highest representation at YCS Vegas in terms of top cut. It was also the most played deck online on Dueling Book in the last 7 days, with the 61% match win percentage. And anytime a deck hits that 60% win rate, it is at that elite level, and it is the best deck of the format. But of course, its gimmick of locking the main monster zones, the spell and trap zones, is certainly something players are not fond of, because it's just preventing your opponent from being able to play at all, which I guess technically has been the theme for a lot of tier 1 decks in this game's history. Now, in terms of the deck's cost, this has certainly been the main conversation for Kashtira, because it's just a very expensive deck, right? And this is just looking at the main component of the deck that you really need, such as the Fenrir's, the Unicorns, the Field Spell, and the other spell. Very expensive. On top of that, you add on another $150 from Prosperities and the staples. The extra deck cost is certainly a lot more expensive than the extra deck costs I've shown in this video so far. Triple Rise Heart, Double Zeus, that certainly adds up. The Barone, even with the reprint coming, it's certainly still expensive. And so overall, it is a really expensive deck to play. Now, if you're looking to invest into this deck, hopefully you are going to be playing in a lot of competitive events, at least at the regional level. If you're only looking to play at locals, then it does get a little bit harder for me to recommend this to someone, considering its high steep cost. But of course, if money is not a factor for you and you really love Kashtira and how the deck functions, then yeah, of course, go for it. Just speaking from an investment perspective, I think it is the best deck of the format, but it does have a very high upfront cost, and I would say a pretty high steep cost compared to even something like Tierland's last format, which was also the best deck of the format, and it even then did not reach the price tag that this Kashtira deck has been at. So just some things to keep in mind as you're looking to choose which deck to play and which deck you want to invest in as for this current meta. And so hopefully this video was helpful in terms of helping you make those decisions. Definitely let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. It's certainly kind of new for me and something I've wanted to bring for quite some time. But as always, a very, very big thanks to my Patreons. As always, I really do appreciate the support. Really does mean a lot to me. And well, take care, guys.